Hello, I'm Andrew Davis of Durham University. Rosenshine teaching principles and similar indicators of great teaching are very popular just now. They are said to help your teaching to be evidence or research informed. Now, they may deserve your support, but not on the grounds that they are research informed. Here's why. Suppose we're told that a given teaching principle, allegedly supported by research and evidence, contributes to learning outcomes. We wonder whether it will work for us. At this point, of course, it is vital to ask exactly what it refers to. Consider some of the Rosenshine teaching principles. Begin the lesson with a review of previous learning. Present new material in small steps. Ask a large number of questions and to all students. Provide models and worked examples. Practice using the new material. Check for understanding frequently and correct errors. Obtain a high success rate. Provide scaffolds for difficult tasks. Many teachers, of course, say these principles are useful. But is it actually possible for scientific research to establish them? Let's see. As stated, they are pretty general and abstract. They have to be interpreted to be applied to a particular teaching context. In their generic form, they are open to multiple interpretations. Detailed classroom applications will need to reflect many things, including pupil age, their current attainments and motivation, the subject concerned, how abstract or theoretical the content may be, how much there is in the way of practical skills, whether the knowledge takes a short time to teach or many months. What is counted as understanding? What kinds of questions are asked and what form of scaffolding is meant? Teacher personality, skills, knowledge and her relationships with the students. So consider, begin the lesson with a review of previous learning. Imagine in some detail what this might look like in a Year 9 RE lesson in the middle of several lessons about creation myths. A Year 6 lesson about grammar with those SATs in mind. A Year 13 maths lesson about matrices. A reception lesson about letter formation and what does this principle even mean in a drama lesson. And what about the term review itself? Here's just a few of the possible variants. The teacher just summarises and simply tells the students, or the teacher interacts with pupils and draws it out from them, filling in the gaps as and when necessary. And what might she decide to summarise? Knowledge, concepts, propositions? How abstract? How much detail? What language does she use to characterise that previous learning? And answers to these questions will of course vary depending on age, stage of students and the subject matter concerned. So teachers make the fundamental detailed decisions about implementation. Moreover, their decisions may vary from one subject to another and from one group of students to another, and there are likely to be sound professional reasons for this variety. I'm making the following claim in this short talk. Neither the principle in its generic version nor in its specific application in a particular context version is amenable to research support. Now, why is that? First, consider a principle in its generic version. It would need to be readily and consistently detectable in any given lesson or lessons. Observers must be able to agree with each other about whether a principle in its generic form is present or not. Inter-observer agreement is a necessary condition for robust research into its efficacy. Consider once more one of the principles, providing models and worked examples. This would be so different in the context of a reception class in comparison with sixth form science. What would agreement between observers that this generic principle was being enacted actually mean? The words used might be the same, but given the huge variety of contexts concerned, where does that get us? The trouble is that at a deep level, it is unclear what such verbal agreement amounts to. How could mere words identify and capture any kind of objective resemblance between the diverse situations concerned? There would be no independent way of assessing the degree of resemblance. And would observers who found it difficult to agree with others be filtered out of the research? Compare this with testing a drug's efficacy in a whole range of medical and human contexts. In such a case, there are independent ways of checking whether the drug in a particular dose is present or not. So, any claim that a Rosenshine teaching principle can be scientifically researched in its generic form faces significant challenges. Consider now instead whether a teaching principle can be researched in the guise of one of its specific and detailed interpretations and applications. It becomes a context-bound application, recognizable by a range of observers, no doubt. Yet it couldn't and certainly shouldn't be researched in a range of contexts across different teachers and schools. Surely no teacher or school would or could countenance it being researched as some kind of a context-independent teaching recipe. The point is that it worked in a particular context. It can't be detached from that context. Adults can, of course, deliver classroom performances insulated from pupils' current knowledge and understanding, and indeed from any aspects of the context concerned. They can refrain from interacting with students. In this fashion, theoretically at least, these performances can be standardized. They can be the same from one class to another, from one teacher to another, and one school to another. They acquire a kind of essence. They could morph into a recipe or a kind of lesson script. This might allow them to be researched like a drug dose. Students may still learn something from this form of delivery, but wrenching the detailed instantiation of the teaching principle from its context destroys it, educationally speaking. But, I hear you cry, I am talking nonsense about the research. You can simply look at a whole range of schools and contexts with all sorts of variations. If teachers and observers say that a given generic teaching principle is operating, that's fine. You compare the results with other schools where it's said that the principle concerned isn't operating. The variations will be random, and so any measurable effects will be due to the teaching principle itself. That's how they can get researched in a rigorous and robust fashion. My response here. Apparently, we are just asking people whether a given principle in its generic form is operating. But their responses are open to possible distortion, ideological bias, and so on. As I said earlier, if we're testing for drug efficacy, we have an independent way of identifying the presence of the drug in a given strength. We lack this when considering teaching principles. To sum up with the problems with thinking that Rosenshine teaching principles can be research informed. Either they are characterized as a precisely specified recipe of some kind, in which case they won't have and surely should not be researched, or they're left as abstract, flexible, and hence open to multiple interpretations, in which case, as generic principles, research into their efficacy faces significant challenges. If we insist on continuing to use them as generic guidelines, don't award them any kind of impossible scientific authority that would be derived from having been researched. And to repeat, the teachers who do like Rosenshine's principles must draw on their own professional expertise when deciding in detail what is the best thing to do in the classroom. Let's focus on the importance of professional expertise rather than appeals to some kind of impossible science. Don't wait until some researchers allegedly give the principles authority. I may be told at this point that I've got the relationship between research and Rosenshine's principles all wrong. It's indirect, my opponents may protest. The principles are supported by all sorts of elements from cognitive science. Now, it's beyond my scope in this talk to offer a critique of cognitive science. It's certainly popular in many quarters just now. However, there's a whole range of disciplines that might inform teaching and learning. Some of them take in aspects of the social world, something that's not a prominent feature of cognitive science. It is unclear why cognitive science should feature almost exclusively when people talk about the desirability of research-informed teaching. And the more indirect the support from cognitive science, the more we need to foreground teachers' practical and detailed interpretations for their contexts. So my main arguments and points stand. Another point about Rosenshine's research He claims that support for his principles is partly derived from study of master teachers, those whose approaches are linked to the greatest gains in pupils' test performance. Again, it is beyond the scope of this short talk to offer a critique of test performance as a proxy for true and valuable educational attainment. However, we may sometimes be talking here about a master teacher as expert in raising test performance. Such an expert is not necessarily a truly good teacher. And surely, study of master teachers doesn't and shouldn't result in a precise recipe that aspiring teachers ought to copy and follow. Are Rosenshine's teaching principles the only villains here? Certainly not. Candidates even more resistant to robust research include group work, constructivist teaching, even direct instruction, unless so specific and scripted that it's not even worth researching because it isn't actually teaching in the first place. There are more ways of being evidence-informed than by drawing on research that emulates the methods of natural science. Teachers have appealed before to what looks like authoritative scientific research to support what they do. Multiple intelligence theory, even learning styles. But teachers have their own authority. Teachers own a vast body of expertise, sometimes called vernacular pedagogy. It's been developed over generations. Teachers as a body own this knowledge rather than individual teachers. In the right conditions, it is passed on to new recruits. It's rarely, if ever, codifiable. It cannot be expressed as rules. Thank you for listening.